Hi everyone, and welcome to this talk about OpenAPI Bot, a chatbot to help you understand REST APIs. My name is Hamza Douibi, and I am a researcher from the Open University of Catalonia in Barcelona. This is a work I co-authored with my colleagues Wendell Daniel and Jordi Cabot. So before getting into the details of this tool, let me first start by briefly describing the motivation behind this work. Over the last years, we have seen a growing number of available public web APIs. So now you can browse many online repositories and find web APIs offering a varieties of functionalities that you can include into your app, such as geolocalization, online payment, and messaging, just to cite a few. The predominant style for creating this web APIs is REST, which offers a lightweight solution to build web APIs by relying only on HTTP messages. Since REST does not provide any standard or specification to describe REST APIs, many proposals have appeared along the years to fill this gap. And the most famous and used one is the OpenAPI specification. The OpenAPI specification is created and maintained by the OpenAPI initiative, which is a consortium of industry experts focused on creating, evolving, and promoting a vendor-neutral description format for REST APIs. To illustrate the OpenAPI specification, let's take a look at this definition created by the OpenAPI community, which describes a pet store management app. I have taken a small subset of the definition to give you an idea about the kind of information you may find in this specification. So let's walk through this definition. OpenAPI begins with the information block, which describes the metadata information of the API, such as the version of the API, its title, its description, and the contact information. It also includes the host serving the API and the base path for to all the paths of the API. The definition includes also the paths that are available by the API and the HTTP methods supported for each individual path, and all the details related to that. For example, under the path pet ID here is a placeholder. We find the get operation, which includes the pet ID parameter, which has to be injected in the path. We find also the possible responses that can be returned by the operation, among other things. The definition also includes the data structures manipulated by the API as JSON schema objects. This helps us see the object we can expect to get back from the API, or what can be expected by the API as part of the request. Here, for example, we have a subset of the pet schema definition, where we can see some of its properties, such as ID, category, and name. OpenAPI can be used in many scenarios. It can, for instance, be used to generate mock servers. But the number one use of OpenAPI is documentation. So you create an OpenAPI definition to have a contract of the common details of your API to share with your customers. We can see on the left side here the generated documentation for the Pet Store API using a Swagger UI tool, and on the right side the one using Redux. While this is very helpful to understand the API without checking its JSON definition, still learning how to use the API requires a lot of time, especially for big APIs, where you have to browse each time the documentation for any doubts you may have regarding the API. So what we propose is to use chatbots to understand these APIs in an interactive way. Chatbots have proven useful in various contexts to automate tasks and improve user experience, such as automated customer services, and we believe that chatbots could also be used to learn about REST APIs. To implement our proposal, we rely on a ChatKit framework. ChatKit is an open source, flexible, multi-platform, and low-code development platform for chatbots. or bots in general. The framework provides a couple of domain-specific languages which you can use to define your bot, and provide a runtime engine in charge of deploying and executing the bot for you over the platform that you desire. It could be, for example, a web page or Slack, among other platforms, which means that you only need to focus on the logic of the bot and leave the heavy lifting, let's say, to Chatbot, which we believe saves developers a lot of time. The figure you see here summarizes the architecture of our OpenAPI bot. On the left side, we see the OpenAPI bot definition using Chatbot. The definition is composed of the intent definition, which includes the training sentences representing typical queries related to an OpenAPI definition. The execution definitions will define how the bot should respond to the match intent. This execution definition uses a custom platform we created to manipulate OpenAPI definitions. On the right side of the figure, we have the OpenAPI bot runtime, which is composed of the core Chatbot runtime, OpenAPI runtime, and OpenAPI modeling SDK. Chatbot runtime is in charge of registering the intent to a Dialogflow engine and deploying the bot and executing it. OpenAPI runtime, on the other hand, defines the concrete implementation of the actions of the OpenAPI platform. This runtime relies on the OpenAPI modeling SDK, which is a model-based framework we created to manipulate OpenAPI definitions. So after deploying this chatbot, users can use our web widgets to interact with the OpenAPI bots. To give you an idea about how the chatbot definition looks like, let's take a look at this example from our OpenAPI bot definition. So on the left side, we see the intent definition get operation by name, which includes training sentences to get an API operation using its name. And the sentences we see inside the input section are the training sentences that will be used by Dialogflow engine. We also have a context called operation, where we extract the operation name parameters from a fragment of the sentences. This parameter will be used to find the operation in the OpenAPI definition. The execution model on the right side contains the rules to execute when the intent get operation by name is matched. As you can see, our bot uses two platforms: React platform, which receives users' inputs and send messages using a web widget, and our custom OpenAPI platform, which manipulates OpenAPI definitions. Here, using the parameter operation name, we invoke the action get operation by name of OpenAPI platform. Then we check the return value to display either the requested operation or an error message if such operation does not exist. Here are three interaction examples related to the pet store API I showed you earlier. The first screenshot is an illustration of the intent we saw in the previous slide. So here we want to know the details of the operation get pet by ID. So we ask the bot, show me the details of the operation get pet by ID. And as you see, so the bot answered with the information about this operation, such as its HTTP method, the related path, and the parameters it takes. Similar questions could be asked for the other paths of the API, such as the schema definitions, the metadata informations, etc. The second and third screenshots illustrate two advanced queries. We call it advanced because the information we are looking for here is not directly available in the definitions. So in the first advanced screenshot, we want to find which operations return instances of pet. So normally to find such information, you need to process the OpenAPI definition and perform a search to collect the operations that return a pet. But here you have this information out of the box. In the last query, we want to find the operations which use the properties of the schema pet in their parameters. This is also not directly available in the OpenAPI definition, and we need to apply some heuristics which compare schema properties with operations parameters to infer such information. And we are able to do that thanks to our OpenAPI modeling SDK. Our OpenAPI bot is open source and it's available online, so let's give it a try. So this is the landing page of the website of OpenAPI bot. So here you will find information on how to load the API and examples of some queries and questions that you can ask to get you started with. You can also find the GitHub repository where we share the source code of the chatbot. To start using the bot, all what you need to do is to click on the button you see here. So at the beginning, the chatbot will ask you to provide the link of your OpenAPI definition. So let's do that. It's loading. Okay, so our pet store API now is loaded and we can start asking. For instance, we want to know, like to get a summary of the API. We can say something like, give me a summary of the API. And here the bot answers with a summary, like a short summary of the API. So here we can have the description of the API, the host serving the API, the transfer protocols of the API, HTTPS and HTTP, and the number of paths, operations, and schema definitions. We can, for instance, ask about the paths. So we can say something like, what are the paths of the APIs? And here we have the list of paths. We can also ask the same question but differently. So we can just say something like, show me the path. And as you see, so we get the same result as before. So now let's try something complicated. So imagine that you are the developer of this API and you decide to, for example, update the schema of a data type, and you want to make sure that you also check where this data type is used to find the operations that you might break doing that. So for example, to get this information, you can ask something like, which operations do I need to change if I change the schema pet? And you see, so here we show you the operation which consume instances of pet. So here, like this operation seek pet instance as in the injury request, and here are the operations which return a pet instance. So with this, you know which operation that you might break if you change the schema pet. Let's go back to the presentation. To summarize, we presented OpenAPI bot, which is a chatbot that leverages the OpenAPI specification to help developers understand less APIs by asking questions on the API using natural language. Besides simple questions, we showed that OpenAPI bot is able to provide some useful information, which is not easy to infer from only a read at the specification. We are monitoring the chatbot and collecting usage data, which we are going to be using to improve the bot by supporting the questions that it was not able to answer. Also, we plan to support OpenAPI version 3 and explore how to use the bot as a new end user interface to also execute calls on the API itself. We advanced quite a lot in this actually. That's it. I will leave a link to OpenAPI bot and the slides I use in this presentation in the description section below in case you want to check that. Also, feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.